You'd think the sight of a grown woman yelling at a slab of ice would be the kind of slapstick comedy that warms a cold winter day, but watching Linda discover her SUV was locked in a frozen prison I'd crafted around a 12. That wasn't just funny. That was a masterpiece. 3 days she was stuck, her pristine white Toyota Highlander marooned in a moat of my own design, all because I'd spent a sleepless night with a shovel, a hose, and a grudge that could melt glaciers. This wasn't some whimsical prank born of boredom, mind you. This was retribution, sculpted in ice, for the Dulaw 1,500 Snowblower she'd swiped from my garage and declared neighborhood property, with the smugness of a dictator annexing a small country. And that wasn't even the half of it. Linda had also tapped into my private well to keep her rose bushes perky through the summer, a little felony she thought I wouldn't notice. So when I flushed her illicit irrigation line with septic runoff and watched her prize garden turn into a swamp of despair, I'll admit, I felt a spark of joy that no Christmas carol could match. But to understand how we got here, how a quiet street in a sleepy suburb became a battlefield of spite, you need to rewind to the day Linda rolled into my life like a storm cloud with a perm and a clipboard. It started innocently enough. I'd moved to Pine Hollow Lane 2 years prior, a modest stretch of ranch-style homes with no HOA to breathe down your neck, just the way I liked it. After my divorce, I'd fought tooth and nail to keep the house see a cozy 3-bedroom with a wraparound porch, a backyard big enough for my mutt, rusty, to chase squirrels, and a well I'd sunk myself to irrigate the vegetable patch I'd turned into a personal sanctuary. The ex got the minivan and half my SAVY NJS. I got solitude and a lawn I didn't have to mow to someone else's standards. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The neighborhood was a mix of retirees, young families, and a few oddballs like mid-40s, single, and content with a beer fridge and a dog who didn't judge my taste in prog rock. We weren't close-knit, but we waved, we shoveled each other's walks when the snow hit hard, and we minded our own business. That is, until Linda arrived. She moved into the old Peterson place across the street, a sagging fixer-upper that had been empty since old man Peterson passed, and his kids sold it off cheap. The house had character, all peeling paint and overgrown shrubs, but Linda descended on it like a reality TV renovator with a budget and a vendetta. Within a week, she'd painted it a glaring shade of coral that clashed with the winter sky, installed solar-powered floodlights that blinded anyone walking by after dusk, and hung a sign on her mailbox that read Linda Voss, Community Liaison. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't care until she showed up on my porch one crisp October afternoon, Yin and VY Ted, clutching a stack of neon yellow flyers and wearing a smile so tight it could have cracked walnuts. "Hi, neighbor," she chirped, thrusting a flyer into my hands before I could retreat. "I'm Linda, your new across-the-street buddy. I'm putting together a little initiative to spruce up Pine Hollow Lane. Bring us all together, set some ground rules, make it a real community." I glanced at the flyer. Pine Hollow Improvement Coalition. It read in bold Comic Sans, followed by a list of suggestions. Uniform mailbox colors, mandatory lawn maintenance schedules, a shared tool library. I looked up at her, blinking. "We don't have an HOA here, Linda." Her laugh was sharp, like a fork scraping a plate. "Oh, I know that. This isn't an HOA not yet, anyway. It's voluntary, just a way to get us on the same page. For now." She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I couldn't help but notice your mailbox is a little rustic. I'm proposing we all go for a nice, modern black. It'd really tie the street together." I held the flyer like it was a live grenade. "My mailbox works fine. Been here longer than you have." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "Well, think about it. I'm hosting a meeting next week at my place, 7 p.m. Bring a snack if you'd like. We'll talk about the future of Pine Hollow." She turned on her heel, her sensible loafers clicking against my porch steps, and I watched her march back across the street, already plotting her next target. That was the first sign of trouble. I should have seen it coming. Linda wasn't just a busybody. She was a one-woman bureaucracy with a mission to turn our quiet corner of the world into her personal fiefdom. I tried to shrug it off. I'd dealt with worse ex-wives, tax audits, a raccoon that once nested in my attic. But Linda wasn't a raccoon you could trap and release. She was a force of nature, armed with passive-aggressive notes and an uncanny ability to rope people into her schemes. The next few months were slow escalation. She'd leave friendly reminders taped to my door about trimming my hedges that didn't exist or suggest I repaint my shed because its faded blue lowered the street's aesthetic value. She cornered Mrs. Delaney, the 70-year-old widow next door, into joining her coalition, and soon enough, I'd see them power walking together, Linda jabbering away while Mrs. Delaney nodded like a hostage. Then came a garden incident. One hot July day, I noticed my well pump running longer than usual. I checked the meter, did some math, and realized I was losing water hundreds of gallons more than my tomatoes and Rusty's kiddie pool could account for. A quick stroll around the block revealed the culprit. A green garden hose snaking from my wellhead, under the street, and straight into Linda's backyard, where her roses bloomed like they'd been juiced with steroids. I knocked on her door, calm as I could manage. "Linda, you've got a hose hooked up to my well. That's private property." She appeared in a floral apron, wiping her hands on a towel, all innocence. "Oh, that? I figured it was a community resource, since it's so close to the road. Water's for everyone, right? Besides, my roses were wilting, and I couldn't let that happen." "It's my well," I said, voice flat. "I dug it. I paid for it. You don't get to tap it without asking." She tilted her head, unfazed. "Well, if it's such a big deal, I'll disconnect it. But you might want to think about how this looks hoarding water while your neighbors struggle. Not very community-minded." She shut the door before I could respond, and by evening, the hose was gone. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Winter hit hard that year, a relentless beast of snow and ice that turned Pine Hollow Lane into a frozen tundra. I prepared in advance, stocking up on salt, firewood, and a brand-new Snowblower, a gleaming red beast with a 28-inch clearing path and enough horsepower to chew through drifts like they were cotton candy. It cost me Dulaw $1,500, a splurge I justified because at 45 I deserved one damn thing that made life easier. I'd spent a Saturday clearing my driveway, the sidewalks, even old Mr. Torres's walkway 3 houses down, because the guy's 80 and still insists on feeding the birds in a blizzard. Exhausted but satisfied, I parked the Snowblower in my garage, poured myself a whiskey-spiked coffee, and settled in to watch the storm bury the world outside. Half an hour later, I glanced out the window and froze. The Snowblower was gone. Not misplaced, not buried under a drift gone. I checked the garage, the yard, even trudged through knee-deep snow to see if I'd somehow left it at Mr. Torres's. Nothing. Then I remembered the security camera I'd installed above my porch after the raccoon fiasco. I pulled up the footage, and there she was, Linda, in a puffy teal parka, dragging my Snowblower down the street like a Viking hauling plunder. She didn't even try to hide, it just waddled along, Leah VYing a trail in the snow straight to her driveway. I was at her door in minutes, snow clinging to my boots, steam practically rising off me. She opened it with a smirk, like she'd been waiting. "Linda, give me back my Snowblower. Now." She crossed her arms. "Oh, that? I borrowed it. We're in a state of emergency out there, roads closed, power flickering. The coalition agreed we should pool resources. You'd already cleared your drive, so I figured you wouldn't mind." "Borrow," I snapped. "You stole it. It's mine. Hand it over." She sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. In times of crisis, we all pitch in. It's called being a good neighbor. "I'll bring it back when I'm done." Then she shut the door in my face. I stood there, fists clenched, snow melting into my socks, and watched through her window as she fired up my Snowblower and started clearing her driveway with the finesse of a toddler wielding a jackhammer. She didn't bring it back that night, or the next. When I went to retrieve it myself, I found it dumped at the curb, caked in ice, the auger jammed with gravel and sticks, the engine sputtering like it had been through a war zone. She'd run it dry, dented the chute, and left it to freeze overnight. I dragged it home, spent hours prying out debris and thawing it with a hairdryer, but the damage was done. My pride and joy was a wounded soldier, and Linda didn't even have the decency to pretend she cared. I filed a police report, small claims, petty theft, but the cops shrugged it off. CIVYL matter, they said. Take it up with her or sue her. I considered it, but I knew Linda would spin it into a martyrdom tale for her coalition cronies. So I stewed, plotting in silence as the snow kept falling. That's when I realized this wasn't about a Snowblower anymore. It was about principle. Linda didn't just want to borrow my stuff, she wanted to control everything, me included. She was a suburban tyrant in sensible shoes, and I was done playing nice. The first act of revenge was subtle, almost poetic. I found her old hose hookup still buried under a snowbank near my well. She disconnected it, sure, but the pipe she'd jury-rigged into my system was still there, a little PVC artery begging for mischief. I hooked it up to my septic tank's overflow valve instead, flipped the pump, and watched as her backyard turned into a stinking marsh. The next morning, she stormed out in her bathrobe, shrieking as her precious roses drowned in a brown slurry. She banged on my door, face redder than her coral house. "Did you do this?" she demanded, pointing at her ruined garden. I leaned against the frame, sipping coffee. "Do what? Looks like your irrigation's got a mind of its own. Maybe you should have asked before tapping my well." "You're disgusting," she hissed. "This is sabotage." "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same thing about my Snowblower." She glared, then stomped off, muttering about legal action. I didn't care. The stench wafting across the street was Tory enough for now. But Linda wasn't deterred. If anything, it fueled her. She doubled down, recruiting more neighbors to her coalition, holding emergency meetings in her Lee room where she'd rant about uncooperative elements, read me, and push for rules that conveniently targeted my property. She proposed a tool-sharing mandate, claiming my shed full of gear I'd accumulated over years was a community asset because it was Cybel from a street. She even suggested my well should be regulated for fair use, as if I'd dug it for her personal hydration. Then came the second storm of monster that dumped 2 feet of snow overnight and plunged the temperature into the single digits. A deep freeze warning flashed across every weather app, promising ice and misery. Linda parked her SUV at the curb as usual, smug in her clear driveway, probably gloating about my busted Snowblower. That's when inspiration struck. I didn't need machinery to fight back. I had physics, patience, and a shovel. At midnight, when the neighborhood slept under a blanket of white, I bundled up, grabbed my tools, and got to work. I dug a trench around her car 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, a perfect circle like a moat around a castle. It took hours, my breath fogging in the frigid air, my hands numb despite gloves. When the trench was done, I hooked a hose to my outdoor spigot, set it to a slow trickle, and filled the moat layer by layer. By dawn, it was a solid ring of ice in Cybel under a dusting of snow, locking her SUV in place like a fly in amber. I retreated inside, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and waited for the show. She emerged at 8 a.m., keys jingling, ready to conquer the day. Then she saw I'd rather didn't. She stepped onto the ice, slipped, and landed hard, her coffee mug shattering on the frozen ground. The scream that followed could have woken a coma patient. She scrambled up, circled the car, kicked at the ice, and shrieked again when it didn't budge. I watched from my window, sipping my brew, as she flung hot water from a kettle onto the tires, only to see it refreeze instantly with a satisfying crack. Neighbors peeked out, then ducked back inside, unwilling to get involved. Linda tried salt, a hammer, even a hairdryer with an extension cord snaking from her porch. Nothing worked. For 3 days, that car stayed put, a monument to her hubris and my handiwork. But that wasn't the real revenge knot yet. While she raged at her icy prison, I was plotting something bigger. See, Linda's coalition wasn't just annoying, it was illegal. She'd been impersonating an HOA, issuing fines and notices with no authority. I kept every flyer, every note, every email she'd sent to the neighborhood listserv. I took it all to a lawyer friend who confirmed what I suspected. Her little empire was a house of cards, and I could topple it with one well-placed push. All I needed was proof and a few allies. I started with the well. I'd snapped photos of her hose hookup before I'd flushed it dated, time-stamped, undeniable. I filed a complaint with the city, citing theft of utilities and trespassing. Then I canvassed the block, quietly rallying neighbors who'd grown tired of Linda's reign. Mr. Torres signed on after she'd borrowed his ladder without asking. Mrs. Delaney flipped when I showed her the fines Linda had threatened her with were unenforceable. Even Jake, the guy down the street with a V-Vintage Mustang he waxed every weekend, joined up after Linda suggested his carport was an eyesore that needed coalition approval. While Linda was still chipping at her car now, a neighborhood spectacle, I posted a sign in my yard. This property is not subject to the Pine Hollow Improvement Coalition. All resources are private. Trespassers will be dealt with. It was bold, petty, and glorious. She saw it the next morning, mid-swing with a pickaxe, and went still. Then she marched over, face a mask of fury. "What is that?" she spat, jabbing a finger at the sign. "Clarity," I said, leaning on my porch rail. "You like rules, right? Here's mine. This is an attack on our community," she shouted. "There is no community," I replied. "There's just you, playing dictator with a printer and some gullible recruits. I got a folder, here's 6 neighbors, signed statements, legal re-VYEW. We're filing with the city Monday to shut your coalition down. Oh, and you're well stunt? That's in there too." Her mouth opened, closed, then twisted into a snarl. "You think you're clever? I have connections, zoning board, city council. You'll regret this." I grinned, looking forward to it. She stormed off. I knew the war had just begun. Sure enough, within days, I got a notice from the city, an anonymous complaint about my well being a public hazard. I laughed, then countersued, presenting my EVY denke of her illegal tap. The zoning clerk, a tired woman named Marla, flipped through my file and whistled. "She's been on our radar. Keep this up, and she's toast." Linda didn't back down. She pivoted, pitching a real HOA with dues and bylaws, rallying her loyalists with promises of safety and unity. I countered with my own Campino HOA. No rules, just freedom backed by 20 signatures and a pamphlet that laid her schemes bare. The neighborhood meeting I hosted in my garage was standing room only. We voted her out of power, unanimously. Her garden withered from the sewage fiasco. Her car got towed in a cloud of defeat, and when a for sale sign sprouted in her yard, I knew I'd won. She moved out 3 months later, Leah VY-ing Pine Hollow Lane to its quiet chaos in me, to my Snowblower, my well, and a peace hard-earned through the pettiest of wars. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this VY Deo with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next VY Deo.